In this screencast, we're going to try and fly through four different things here. The stratification by race, ethnicity, gender, and age. So we're going to go quickly on this one, but what's what? When we first talk about race and ethnicity, a lot of times people don't understand what the difference is. A racial group, think of physical differences. Okay, ethnicity, think of a national origin or a cultural difference. Now, which one is most easy to notice? That would be obviously a racial situation. One of the problems with Hitler during World War II was, in trying to identify the Jews, sometimes he didn't know who they were because it wasn't as obvious. So that's kind of the difference between race and ethnicity. When we talk about prejudice and discrimination, there's also a difference here. Prejudice is a person's attitudes toward something. Discrimination refers to their behavior. So a person could be prejudiced, but potentially not be discriminatory. Okay? They may feel certain ways or have certain attitudes, but may not act on those attitudes. All right? Now, if we take what we just learned and we talk about discrimination today, and in particular like hate crimes, if we look at the hate crimes and the percent of motivation behind those hate crimes, I can tell you these percentages have changed almost none at all in the last 10 years. They've remained very, very constant with just slight differences. And you see that most of the hate crimes are related to race. Why? Because that's the easiest thing to see, and therefore people tend to discriminate against it. They're going to be more likely to discriminate. Okay. Diversity in the United States. When we talk about diversity, we have become a much more diverse country. We are diverse now in terms of like eating establishments, restaurants, things like that, education, a variety of places, the workplace. But the one place where we still are least likely to be diverse is in where we live. People still tend to live in communities with other people of their particular race and or ethnicity. You can see kind of a chart here in terms of how diverse is the United States. If you look at Indiana right here, Indiana is ranked 33rd in terms of diversity within the United States. Where is the most diverse state? That would actually be Hawaii. It's ranked number 1 for the most diverse. In terms of jobs and occupations, how fair is the situation in the United States today? Well, it's still not totally fair. It's not where we should be. We refer to a glass ceiling. A glass ceiling is kind of an invisible barrier that tends to block certain people based on either their sex or their race or their ethnicity from management positions or higher level positions. So in other words, it's okay for a woman or a minority male to get to certain positions, but when it comes to management, there tends to be kind of a glass ceiling there that's hard to break through. Currently in the United States, if a female and a male are tending to do the exact same job, have the same responsibilities, on average, a female earns 78% of what the male tends to earn. Now, some occupations are better than others at equalizing those things, but there are some positions where it's dramatically different, simply because one person's a male and another's a female. Now, things are improving. In the Fortune 500 companies within the United States, we set a new record just last year in 2012. 18 of those companies, 18 of those 500 companies had women CEOs. That's a new record. If you look back basically 10 years, it's improved by 2.5 times the number of CEOs back in the early 2000s. So it's good and bad. Now, if you look at it, it's a good trend, but think about it. That's 18 companies out of 500 that have women CEOs. Not a good record overall. Affirmative action. Affirmative action is a program that actually kind of evolved out of the civil rights era. Affirmative action, a lot of people have misconceptions about what it refers to. Let me explain. Affirmative action is designed to basically encourage or help out women and minority males in terms of getting jobs or getting an education, getting various positions, things like that, but only if they have equal qualifications to someone else who's applying. Let's say that two people come in for a job. You have a female or a male minority, and you have a white male. If they are equal in terms of their evaluation, in terms of their criteria, what background they have, if they are equal, affirmative action encourages anyway, that companies will hire the female or the minority male. Now, this does not have anything to do with quotas. Some people think, companies have a certain quota or a certain number of, minorities or women that they have to hire. That's not the case. That is not what affirmative action is all about. If two people go in for a job and one person, doesn't matter who, is clearly superior in terms of their qualifications, that person should get the job. Now, affirmative action, it does have some negative implications for a lot of people. A lot of people still around the country will look at it and say, well, it's nothing more than reverse discrimination. But affirmative action has helped in terms of getting females and minorities into higher level positions as well. Let's talk about gender roles. Okay, stratification by gender. Now, first of all, it's one of my pet peeves, but gender refers to masculine and feminine. It's not male, female. So many people misconstrue that nowadays. On surveys and things like that, you see gender, and it's nobody's business, but gender refers to masculine and feminine. Okay, and in the United States and really worldwide, socialization, when we start socializing kids literally at birth, we begin to treat them differently based on whether they're wearing a little blue cap or a little pink hat. And those gender roles begin very, very early in life. Now, it's kind of interesting how different things play out. Back in the 1970s, there was an experiment done on college campus where they took a group of males and a group of females and they gave them a story. They gave them the first line of a story and had the males and females complete the story. And the story began, the males got a version of the story that said, at the end of first term final exams, John finds himself at the top of his medical school class. And then the males were supposed to finish that story. Girls got the exact same thing, except instead of John, it was Anne. So Anne found herself at the top of her medical school class. Now, this was in the early 1970s. The researchers evaluated the stories and evaluated it based on how successful that John or Anne ended up being. It was unbelievable. John tended to be pretty successful. I think the success rate for John was somewhere around 70 to 80% of the stories ended up with John being successful. Anne was a total disaster. I think it was under 20% of females actually had a success story for Anne. I mean, they would do things like, at the end of first term finals, Anne finds herself at the top of her medical school class, trying to decide whether to jump or not. In other words, she's at the top of the building and she's trying to figure out whether to go overboard. That kind of creates a whole thing. What the researchers found at that time, they believed females actually had a fear of success. Now, this was right around the time period when a lot more females were now beginning to enter the workforce and so on. So, is it true today? I don't think so. I don't think you see that at all, but it has changed dramatically over the last 30 or 40 years now. Again, small strides, women in politics increasing dramatically in the last 20 years. In the workforce, again, since the 70s and really 80s. Some of the consequences, okay, one of the things that occurs is if a woman's actually working outside the home, that creates a little bit of an issue because, if the guy's also working, now mom and dad both come home, at 4, 5, 6 o'clock at night, and now who takes care of the kids? Who fixes dinner? Who does the laundry? That sort of thing. And what we found is that in many, I'd say most households, the women are still tending to do far more of the household chores, so to speak, than the males. And they've actually got a term for this. They refer to it as the second shift. It's the female's second shift of the day. They've already worked outside the home. Now they come back and they have to work inside the home. But a lot of families and a lot of places throughout America are having to change the way they do childcare. Family leave policies are different. And a lot of places are now, especially with internet access and things like that, creating alternate work hours as possibilities for their employees. Last thing we're going to talk about is the graying of the United States, or in other words, stratification by age. And you can see the percent of the population over 65 is increasing dramatically. Americans 100 and older represent the fastest growing age group. And in fact, the 90 and over group has almost tripled over the last 30 years to 1.9 million in 2010. And it's expected that people 90 and over, that group is going to quadruple over the next 40 years. So it's huge in terms of the number of older people in the population. Now, this is not just the U.S., this is worldwide, okay? And you can see that on this chart that not only is the percent of older people, 65 and over, increasing dramatically, but you also have a big decrease in the percent of youth that we're having. And you can see that the number of people estimated, okay, about 9.1 billion people in the world by 2050. Now, to give that a little bit more realism there, the world population increases by about 75 million annually, which is adding a United States in terms of population every 4 years. That's amazing. Now, what are some of the issues? Well, older people, they're going to be working in the workforce. That kind of takes away jobs for younger people. We may end up having to change the retirement age in terms of making it, instead of age 65 or 62, maybe the retirement age is going to be 68 or 70 or 75. I've seen some companies already doing that. And the big issues for America, what are we doing in terms of Social Security and Medicare? Those are some huge issues within our culture today in terms of trying to provide those types of income and services for older people in America, and yet, it's just devastating our federal budget. So the answers to those are still to come, those questions, here in the near future.